On August 8th, 2020, the Season 2 finale of Rise of the Muty Tooty Sneak Boys aired, and as of now, it seems like this might be the series finale, as Nickelodeon ordered the second season to be cut short. The series ends on a heartfelt finale where the Turtles battle the Shredder one final time with their classic weapons, a little bit of magic, and most importantly, the power of family. There are some genuinely sweet and emotional moments to punctuate the final deadly encounter that perfectly encapsulated everything this show was good at, leaving us with only 13 episodes of this season instead of the planned 26. The series creator Andy Suriano posted to his Instagram a long and heartfelt goodbye to the show that makes it pretty clear it's not looking good for the future of the series. Much like many classic superhero cartoons before it, Rise was controversial among the fandom for doing things differently. In Andy's unfortunately depressing note, he even says they went out of their way to make sure the characters and the show itself weren't easily categorized and strive to be more complicated than the usual box this franchise would be put in. Thinking outside the box is often a risky move for big-name franchise series such as this, but I want to extend my hand to the creators and the fans in asking you to hear me break down what was so impressive and special about this series, and maybe seeing why it deserves to live again. Rise of the Title That's Too Long is the fourth animated series based on the Teenage Mutant action figure salesman, a comic book with hilarious and irreverent disdain for the 80s era of comics, despite being one of the most memorable examples of them. Ascenso of the Tortugas is a show I thought I would hate when I saw the first promotional images because I've been burned by a lot of modern cartoons lately. Between the cheaply animated and underwritten exploits of Spider-Me, or the pointless yet admittedly pretty funny ongoing adventures of the Never Getting a Season 6 gang, I didn't have high hopes. I thought this was going to be another poorly animated show about nothing where the episodes are just the turtles twerking and making sandwiches with little to no action. I have never been happier to be wrong. Sure, this show's emphasis is on silly, character-driven tomfoolery with a superhero spin, but it manages to do that with a subtle nuance and an insane sense of style that few other superhero cartoons have right now. I'd argue that given the state of things, this is probably the best comic book cartoon out there at the moment by 1,000 miles. It's not even close. Where these other shows trip and fall on their face, or make it clear they don't really care about participating in the race at all, this show Barry Allen's its ass off back around the track so fast your head spins. Yet I haven't seen much praise for it anywhere, and I get the sense that a lot of people hate it because it's not a direct regurgitation of the shows that came before it. The typical bad faith criticism, which seems to be a recurring theme for superhero cartoons. What else could this show have been if not something very different? Think of it like this. You've got this 80s action comic that's a clever parody and subversion of Frank Miller's style of comics with a memorable premise. It's dark and violent and weird and awesome. So there's this adaptation that waters it down into something kiddie and dumb for the mainstream. Instant classic, beloved by millions. There's not a ton of continuity. Every episode is a lighthearted, self-contained adventure with a somewhat limited but very entertaining cast of villains. The silly, fun Madhouse show. Then you have the reboot cartoon that pulls a risky move by adapting the weirdo, crazy comic almost word for word in many cases, and despite its lack of blood, is decently mature in subject matter and tone while still feeling accommodating to the fans of the 80s cartoon. Its characters are a little on the weaker side, but it has great long-running story development and overarching multi-episode plots. The darker, but still fun, plot-driven show. Then the third show that tries to meld the previous two together with varying levels of success. It tries to have its cake and eat it too with pacing that jumps between self-contained episodes and long-running episodic plots. But for the most part, it's enjoyable for being a nostalgic love letter to the 80s cartoon, with a fresh coat of paint and a more developed and mature spin on its characters. The nostalgic, character-driven show. Well, what, did you just want him to make one of these again? All of these shows had episode counts in the triple digits and ran for over 5 years each. You can't just keep going with one of these exactly as they were, or it would get boring. There's a reason all of these got lower ratings in their final seasons and started to lose their audience. They got stale and needed a fresh new makeover. This show needed to be something different. There's a lot of ways to look at the material, and we've already had 2 of the more serious takes in a row, so we felt due for a lighter toned turtle show. And aside from being less about the overall plot and more about just having fun, It really doesn't have that much in common with the 80s show either. This show doesn't excel by retreading old ground and doing it better. Its success is found in all the things that make it unique. It uses a more mystical spin to offset 2012's heavily sci-fi aesthetic, it remixes the characters to break out of their typical molds, and its visual style is incredibly fresh and unique. Just like what Mr. Suriano said in his obituary for the show. Let me break down for you, dear viewer, why this show is different, and why that makes it such a blast. Rise has less serial, more episodic stories, but it doesn't frustrate me like the 2012 show because it doesn't overpromise anything else. Yes, the story moves forward an inch at a time over the course of the 26 episodes in the first season, but Rise of the Middle-Aged Orphan Bats makes it clear that the main goal of the show isn't to tell an overarching plot. It's very upfront with the fact that this is a series of one-off adventures, most of which can be told in any order. By comparison, the 2012 show bugged me because it couldn't decide between one-off stories and a long arc, so it tried to do both and became irritating to binge-watch because of the repetitive nature of the stories. Rise doesn't really have that problem because it's not throwing plot into the background of every single episode. It creeps in every 4 or 5 episodes where they do one that advances the story and gives us a bigger idea of what's going on. It's easier to manage my expectations for the story then, because I know I'm not supposed to be on the edge of my seat wondering what's going to happen with these villains every 5 minutes. I can just relax and enjoy the ride of an episode where they return a late DVD and get attacked by a supervillain, or go on an adventure fighting an evil robot in a pizza restaurant. And like I said, it's never repetitive while binge-watching because the show always finds something new and fun to do with its own established world and characters. The general plot of the first season is that between all the low-stakes, high-energy fun, these two magical criminals with the Foot Clan logo on their faces are trying to find the pieces of a cursed suit of armor, and once it's fully reformed, it will resurrect their master, the Shredder. They're also occasionally teaming up with a demon named John C. Baron Draxum, who wants to use magic alchemy to perform twisted experiments on humans and mutate them into what he believes is a superior race. 13 years ago, the fallout of this guy's experiments accidentally mutated the turtles by splicing them with the human DNA of the man Splinter once was. All of their human traits come from him, meaning in this show, Splinter is biologically their father instead of just their adopted one. I may think the Iron Dad craze is cringy as all hell, but my cold black heart expels some dust when the turtles call Splinter their dad in any canon. We check back in on this plot every few episodes and spend most of our time focusing on the downtime between. It doesn't drag as much as you'd think because they aren't dangling Shredder's return and the subplot of the armor in your face every single episode, and they know how to space it out properly so you can enjoy the smaller stuff in the meantime. And even during the low-stakes minor league outings against random mutants and monsters, we get something pretty unexpected. Some damn fine character work, especially for two of my favorite members of any Turtles cast.
Well, Leo, since you sell the fewest action figures, why don't you go ahead and jump first? Ignoring that...
Something to appreciate this show for is that despite the plot's backburner approach, there's always some very subtle development happening for one or two of the characters in the background of the highly animated chaos. And when the story finally kicks in, all that development during the hijinks plays into the story and makes it so much more satisfying and impactful. Leonardo's development as leader is slow and subtle, and very different from the other shows. While a lot of the time, Leo is just the leader at the start and you have to accept it. The 2012 show gave us a little insight into his desire to lead and his aspiration to be the one on the front of the box. We saw him slowly earn his status through trial and error, and that made it more satisfying. He seemed less like a hard-shelled authority figure and more like an underdog that we rooted for. Rise gives us a clever subversion of this by having Raphael start as the leader and clearly not be that great at it. Like, he's fine, but his ratio of wins to losses is so far in the red it looks like his bandana. Meanwhile, Leo's like the easygoing chill guy that's sort of along for the ride, and when the time comes that Raph's leadership fails, Leo steps up from the background and shows how it's really done. He doesn't aspire to be the leader at all. He never challenges Raph's position and just hangs out. But we see many glimpses into the fact that he's just naturally the best choice for the leader. And I dig how quietly they build this up over both seasons.
Oh, and Blue, you are the leader now.
Wait, what?
Splinter is probably the farthest departure from his usual self. Every version of Splinter so far is pretty much the same personality-wise, but this guy's got some subtle new complexity. Initially, he seems like a grouchy sack of rat that just lays around all day and makes fun of the turtles.
Hey, Pop. Any chance we could have the living room tonight?
And I thought purple was the funny one.
I told you guys I was the funniest.
Pretty lame, and I get why the reaction was so volatile, but it turns out he's got more going on as you watch the series. He's trained them through a Mr. Miyagi method of doing it without them knowing it. The turtles spend all day watching and replicating fight moves from an old Jackie Chan-style martial arts actor named Liu Jitsu. And Splinter has trained them to idolize this guy in a way that they don't for him. They see Splinter as their grouchy father, but they see Liu Jitsu as a hero and an inspiration for mastering the ways of the ninja. He makes them watch movies of Liu fighting guys with dead fish and stepladders, and they start to think it's never going to be relevant until the day they find themselves with no weapons except... and you get the rest. His teaching is subtle and indirect, but he still gave them the tools to survive some pretty crazy circumstances. Beyond that, Splinter's greatest secret is that he's not only the mutated Hamato Yoshi, he is Liu Jitsu, the martial arts master and movie star. After being mutated, his body let itself go somewhat, but his skills as a fighter never faded. That's why it's so cool to finally see him get out of the chair and teach the boys a lesson when they underestimate him in a fight. He's just as badass as ever. Upon learning his human identity, the kids all discover a newfound respect for their father and start following his guidance more.
As far as we're concerned, we live with our hero.
Tell us about that stuntman again.
Oh, Chad! What a prankster.
And as a result of that respect, he's not as afraid to teach them more directly about responsibility and reaches out to them emotionally. We see him becoming more active as a teacher and as a parent, and even participating in some of their shenanigans too. There's character development happening. And I love the way this show reinvents these characters and creates new arcs for them. Even Raph, Donnie, and Mikey all have little stories of growth along the way. Like Raph learning his place on the team and trusting his brothers more, Donnie becoming more humble about his intelligence, and Mikey having to be more brave. They're still the characters we know and love deep down below all the flash. We just get to see them evolving in new ways that we didn't really get to see in any of the previous series, as the Tmnt are usually a bit more static in their personalities. This isn't just booty-shaking, meme-spouting chaos, and while there's certainly an audience for that, and it isn't necessarily a bad thing, I appreciate the hell out of Rise for not falling into the pitfall of just trying to emulate what's financially successful right now. And outside of its deep characters and fun tone, it's got something going for it that deserves all the praise it gets and way more. This show is by far the most visually interesting TMNT series. With its colorful and sharp character designs, its beautifully rendered environments, and its emphasis on expressive, fluid, high-energy movement. I think this is a beautiful blend of Western and Eastern animation, because it also has some pretty strong anime influence on its fight choreography and some of its visual gags. I mentioned previously that the 2012 series felt limited by being a CGI rendered show because they couldn't model as many new locations, characters, and environments as a 2D show. And this one proves that right by having zero limitations. The turtles feel like they can go anywhere and do anything, and they do it with such grace and style. I can't think of any animated show I've seen that was this ambitious with its visuals. This is the Spider-Verse of TV cartoons, and I'm glad Nickelodeon never slashed this show's absurdly high animation budget. Some people chalk Rise up to just being pure eye candy with no substance, but I disagree. There's a lot going on that you have to be paying attention to appreciate underneath the slick visuals. And I also can't get enough of this show's sense of humor.
Ah, yes, so in this case, a game of basketball.
Donnie, I know you know how to say it. We're all on to you.
The dialogue doesn't quite have that same stink of written by a 45-year-old white guy trying to sound like a teenager. All the slang used by the characters feels natural and appropriate, or ironic when necessary. And I don't find myself cringing at the more contemporary gags and story ideas. There's a whole episode where the turtles are trying to watch a skating competition on their phones while stopping a robbery, and they're too bad at multitasking to do both. Not only is this a funny setup for a fight scene, but it feels pretty on brand for today's teenagers while not coming off as preachy about it. It's not the same phone bad, video game bad stuff you keep seeing in the modern Simpsons episodes. The Green Knight Rises also goes out of its way to create new and interesting villains, but make sure they still feel like common TMNT foes. A lot of these guys seem so natural that I was sure they'd be modern takes on characters from previous cartoons. But nope, they're wholly original. My favorite is Baron Draxum. He has this slow redemption arc from a demonic scientist who hates humans to an eccentric guy who lives among them and protects them. And that's pretty special. You don't see Shredder or Krang pulling a 180 like that. I'm just not sure who voices him because all the behind the scenes footage shows an empty seat in the recording booth. And as for Shredder, they spend 2 seasons building him up as a genuine threat, and only giving a taste of his power during his first 2 appearances. In the season finale, you learn he's actually pretty heavily inspired by Tengu Shredder from the 2003 show. Once he's gotten his mind back, he's everything you'd hope for from Shredder. I just wish we got to see more of him.
Hamato, your essence will soon be mine, and then I will be unstoppable.
The show goes out of its way to really take him seriously, and the episodes involving him tend to either have the best action sequences by far, or the most emotional and serious moments of the show. I do have to mention things I don't like about the show, of course, to keep it fair, but that's a pretty short list. I wish we had gotten to see this show's take on Casey Jones, since he's also one of my absolute favorites in the Turtles mythos. Though, it would be hard for them to make him much different from the 2012 version. Wait, what? Which leads me to the next one. This is 2 shows in a row with April as a high schooler, and I kinda miss her being an adult and more like a big sister to the Turtles rather than a friend their own age. Props for not making her kiss any of them though, that earns you a lot of points in my book. And finally, the backstory and history of this hidden magic city filled with yokai is sort of vague and unclear, but a major chunk of the characters cast come from here, and it would have been nice to know more about it. Like why humans drove the yokai underground, or how the society works, or who runs it. The only glimpses we see are typically just Leo and the boys messing around with this magic skeleton guy who lives down there, and occasionally seeing more about this world through him, or the demon spider lady who runs a magic fight club in the basement of her hotel. I was just curious about this stuff and would have liked to know more about it. It left me wanting more, which isn't a bad thing, but it would have made the show a little more satisfying. That's the rub of pacing out information with your show so slowly. You run the risk of leaving questions unanswered if it gets abruptly canceled for stupid reasons. For whatever brainless reason, almost half of this show's episodes originally aired at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. Can you remember ever being awake that early when you were a kid? Or like, even as an adult, I don't think a lot of people would catch that. No one wants to get up early on Saturday. That's the one day a week you're allowed to sleep in as a reward for the previous 5 days of 8 to 3 or 9 to 5 boring garbage. Well, I mean, when we all collectively still went to school and work. And even though it got better with Season 2 airing more in the evenings on Friday, the damage was still done. It doesn't help that the show is only really on cable and it doesn't stream anywhere. My 11-year-old sister is 13 now, and she doesn't watch basic cable. It's all YouTube and streaming platforms. I don't even have cable at my house, and I just had to buy the entire season on Amazon to see this show officially and support it. You couldn't have put the first season on Hulu or Netflix or something? So Nickelodeon pumped an insane amount of money into this show's budget, but decided it was best to be airing exclusively on a platform that young people have effectively abandoned, and a lot of it was premiering at times no one could see it. What sense does that make? Gee, that sure does sound familiar. Why does this keep happening? I feel like as cable television recedes and streaming grows, more and more kids' shows are just going to keep sharing this fate. If there's any target demographic you have to really chase after, it's the younger kids, because if they don't have immediate access to something, they won't go searching for it and will just find something else to watch. Rise of the TMNT was a show worth watching. I know a lot of folks out there may have been apprehensive because it's not what they were used to, but all you had to do was give it a chance to win you over with its good qualities. And more than that, Rise is a show worth saving. Right now, the only plans for any continuation are a Netflix-based movie coming out eventually. But that's not the Seth Rogen one, that's a different thing. Nickelodeon has a habit of tying up shows they cut short with a random movie dumped on Netflix because they don't feel like showing it on the channel. Well, I say that's not going to cut the Ninja Robot here. This show ended way too soon and deserves a second chance. Look, unfortunately, reviving a show like Spectacular Spider-Man or Earth's Mightiest Heroes is kind of a pipe dream because those creators have all moved on to new projects and are busy, while the brand has evolved and those characters have new shows to fill out the gap. Not to mention all the licensing and rights agreements you have to dance around to revive those. But Ninja Turtles is owned exclusively by Viacom and they don't really have that issue. And I'm willing to bet the show's creators haven't had time to pack up shop and move on just yet. They still have episodes storyboarded and ready to go if they wanted to make them. If there's any good time to push for this show to get picked back up, it's now. Let your voice be heard. Make a ton of noise on social media directed at Nick and Viacom that you want this show to come back and be aired in a new way. Nick has stated that they had plans to start producing more content for Netflix, and putting Avatar back on there was a sign of goodwill to get that rolling. This is exactly what they're looking for. This show should release on Netflix and get at least another 3 seasons before Netflix inevitably also cancels it, because they always do that, and god damn it, I wanted to know what was gonna happen on Santa Clarita Diet! But there's still a shot for this one to live on and get a second life if we just push for it. I kinda don't know if they work, but start some petitions. Get a hashtag trending. Politely ask the right people. Let's make a move. Hashtag save Rise of TMNT. And say no to Meme Pool. This show is definitely different, but at the end of the day, it still understood the core themes of TMNT, with brotherhood, family, and absurd adventures that aren't afraid to be silly or insane. If you haven't watched it before, it's definitely worth your time, and if you have watched it, there's no doubt you probably want to see more. So let's not let this one end up like so many others. Let's save this show, because we still love being a turtle.
Turtle forever!
I love it when having no plan comes together.